Hey guys, and welcome back. Tonight we're settling into something special, something that takes us back to a time when the future felt like it was happening in your kitchen. When people genuinely believed that a machine could solve your life's problems, or at least make your Tuesday morning a little bit easier. We're talking about the 1970s, that strange, optimistic decade when innovation felt personal, when gadgets weren't just conveniences, they were promises. Before we dive in, I want to say a sincere thank you to the viewer who suggested this topic. Seriously, you always send the best ideas, the kind that make me genuinely excited to sit down and write. Your comments shape this whole channel, and I'm so grateful for that. So please, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I know someone out there is up at 3 a.m, maybe making tea, maybe just thinking about life, and I'm genuinely honoured you're here. And hey, if you're enjoying these deep dives into history and nostalgia, consider subscribing. We're also now live on Spotify, so if you want to take these stories with you on a walk or during your commute, you can find us there. The link is in the description. It means everything when you tune in, no matter where you are. Now, I want you to get comfortable. Actually comfortable. Dim the lights in your room, put on a fan if you have one, something soft to create a gentle hum in the background. Grab a blanket, settle in like you're not planning to move for the next hour or so, because we're about to step into a world where people were genuinely convinced that machines could change everything. Think about this for a second. What did optimism actually feel like in the 1970s? What was it like to believe that the future was arriving in appliance form? What did your kitchen look like when every new gadget promised to save you time? When people gathered around these machines, like they were witnessing small miracles? Did people actually use half the things they bought, or did they sit in cabinets, expensive and hopeful? And here's the real question. How many of these gadgets do you still have in your house, quietly gathering dust? Proof of a future that never quite happened? And just like that, it is 1972. There's a Cuisinart in someone's cabinet. A lava lamp glows softly in a living room. Someone just brought home their first digital watch, marvelling at it like it's a portal to tomorrow. The decade is humming with possibility, and the American kitchen is about to become very, very crowded. The Cuisinart arrived in 1973 like a small revolution wrapped in brushed steel. It was supposed to change everything about how you approach cooking, transforming hours of chopping, slicing and mixing into seconds of mechanical whirring. The television commercials showed women with perfect hair, barely even touching the machine, just feeding ingredients in and watching as the blade did all the work. It was efficient, modern, and somehow deeply promising, as though this one appliance could liberate you from the kitchen forever. But the Cuisinart's real legacy wasn't just about saving time. It was about the idea that time itself could be purchased, that drudgery could be outsourced to a motor and some spinning blades, that the future would be less about labour and more about leisure. You stand in a kitchen showroom, and there it sits on the counter, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It's substantial, commanding the counter space with a kind of quiet authority. The salesman demonstrates it with the reverence usually reserved for religious relics. "Watch this," he says, feeding a carrot into the feed tube. Within seconds, the carrot has been transformed into uniform slices, piling up in the bowl below like something from a factory, not a home kitchen. Your hands, which have spent countless hours wielding a knife, suddenly feel obsolete. The salesman feeds another carrot and another, and the pile grows, perfect slices, all the same thickness, all the same size. It's mesmerizing in its efficiency. The promise was intoxicating. Imagine not having to chop onions anymore, not standing over a cutting board for 20 minutes, your eyes burning, tears streaming down your face. Imagine preparing a meal in half the time it used to take. Imagine having your afternoons back, time to yourself, time for things other than endless knife work and prep. The Cuisinart represented something deeper than convenience. It represented freedom. Or at least, it represented the idea of freedom, packaged in plastic and stainless steel, priced at a few $100s, which felt like a fortune but somehow also like a bargain when you considered the hours it would save. At home, once you brought it through the door, the kitchen seemed to reorganize itself around this new presence. You found a spot for it on the counter, though it dominated the space, or you sacrificed a cabinet to store it, which felt wasteful given how often you planned to use it. You read the manual, which came with recipes specifically designed to showcase what the machine could do. Spinach dip made easy, pie crust prepared in seconds, pesto that required no mortar and pestle, no tedious grinding by hand. The recipes seemed designed to convince you that this purchase was justified, that this machine was going to transform not just how you cooked, but what you cooked, opening up possibilities that had previously seemed too labour-intensive to attempt. And it worked. The Cuisinart did exactly what it promised. Your prep time did decrease dramatically. You could feed in a handful of vegetables and have them processed faster than you could have done it by hand. The novelty was genuine, almost thrilling. You would stand at the counter, watching the machine work, marvelling at how quickly it accomplished tasks that used to consume your time. You invited friends over partly to show off the machine, watching their faces as they realised what technology could accomplish in their own kitchens. The demonstrations became almost ceremonial, you feeding in ingredients, the machine working its magic, your guests expressing genuine amazement at the speed and consistency of the results. But something unexpected happened in the months and years that followed. The time you saved didn't translate into leisure. It translated into cooking more elaborate meals. If you could prepare ingredients so quickly, perhaps you could attempt more complex recipes. Perhaps you could make things from scratch that you'd previously bought prepared. The Cuisinart didn't free you from the kitchen. It simply changed what you did in it, raising expectations, enabling more ambitious cooking projects, creating new standards for what you felt obligated to prepare. Still, you kept using it. It became part of your kitchen's landscape, as familiar as the oven itself. You learned all its attachments, all its blades and discs. You understood which tasks it excelled at, and which ones your hands still did better. Onions could be processed in seconds, but they needed attention during cooking to avoid turning to mush. Dough could be made quickly, but you still had to know when to stop processing, had to develop a feel for the right texture. It was a tool, ultimately, but it was also a symbol. It meant you were modern. It meant you'd embraced progress. It meant you believed that machines could improve your life, and sometimes believing that was enough. The whirring sound became the sound of your kitchen, the familiar mechanical voice of efficiency and possibility, a constant reminder that the future had arrived, and it was happening right there on your counter, transforming your relationship with time, with cooking, with the daily work of feeding yourself and your family. You can feel the weight of cultural expectation in an electric can opener. Someone, somewhere, decided that the simple act of twisting a manual opener was simply too burdensome for modern life. And so here arrived this device, plugged into your kitchen wall, whirring to life at the mere presence of a can. It sat on countertops like a small monument to convenience, a testament to the idea that absolutely nothing, not even the smallest task, could be left undone by human hands if a motor could be attached to it. The electric can opener was mounted just above the counter, usually beside the toaster, another appliance that seemed to have taken on a role that hands had previously managed. You would hold the can up to it, align it correctly with the piercing mechanism, and press a lever or button. The motor would engage with a whirring sound, the can would rotate against a spinning blade, and within seconds the lid would separate from the can with a satisfying pop. No hands required, no effort needed, no small cuts from sharp metal edges, those tiny wounds, that seemed inevitable when using a manual opener, the price you paid for the simple act of accessing canned food. It was the epitome of the 70s kitchen philosophy. Why use manual effort when electricity could do it for you? The logic was simple, almost seductive in its simplicity. Repetitive motion was exhausting. Manual can openers required a specific technique, a particular kind of coordination that not everyone possessed with equal skill. Some people struggled with them, found them frustrating, gave up halfway through. An electric can opener democratized the process. Anyone could operate it. A child could open a can. An elderly person with arthritis could open a can. A person with only one functional hand could open a can. It was accessible. It was fair. It represented a kind of technological justice, the idea that capability should be distributed equally, that inability shouldn't prevent you from accessing the contents of a can, but the electric can opener also represented something else. The beginning of the end of manual skill in the kitchen. There was something to be said for the dexterity required to use a manual can opener correctly, for the small satisfaction of having opened a can yourself, for the physical connection between your hands and the tool and the task. The electric can opener severed that connection. It made the task effortless, but in doing so, it also made it invisible. The can opener did the work. You simply stood there and waited, passive, uninvolved. Your role reduced to holding the can in the correct position, and wait you did. Kitchens throughout the 70s hummed with the sound of electric can openers working, a small whirring that became background noise, so familiar you barely noticed it anymore. You would stand at the counter, perhaps looking out the window or thinking about dinner or planning your day, while the machine did what your hands had once done. The space opened up by this automation was supposed to be filled with more important thoughts, more valuable activities. In reality, it was usually just filled with emptiness, with waiting, with a strange liminal space between one task ending and the next one beginning. The noise it made was distinctive, a high-pitched whine that cut through kitchen silence. People became so accustomed to this sound that its absence seemed strange, seemed like something was missing. If you visited someone without an electric can opener, the manual opener felt almost archaic, like a relic from a previous era, something that belonged in a museum, not in actual use. Yet the electric can opener never quite achieved the ubiquity of some other appliances. Many people kept their manual openers, used them alongside the electric version, preferred them for reasons they couldn't quite articulate. Perhaps it was the control. Perhaps it was nostalgia for a simpler time. Perhaps it was simply that a manual can opener never broke down, never needed electricity, never represented the slow surrender of human capability to mechanical convenience. There was something stubbornly independent about sticking with a manual opener, something almost rebellious. Still, in thousands of kitchens the electric can opener remained, mounted on walls, a small monument to efficiency, a reminder that in the 70s, absolutely nothing was too small to mechanize, too simple to improve, too insignificant to deserve its own motor and its own plug. It opened cans quickly and reliably, asking only that you hold them in the right position, that you trust the machine to do the rest. And for the most part it did, faithfully opening can after can, year after year, a small but steady presence in the kitchen, visible proof that the future had arrived, and the future made opening cans easier. The microwave was supposed to be the future, and it looked like one. Boxy, beige, humming with quiet menace, it arrived in kitchens throughout the 1970s with a mixture of excitement and deep, lurking suspicion. People were genuinely concerned that it might be dangerous, that the invisible waves heating their food could somehow harm them. And yet they bought them anyway, because even fear couldn't compete with the promise of a fully cooked meal in under 10 minutes. The microwave represented something deeper than convenience. It represented a world where time itself had been compressed, where waiting was becoming obsolete. The first microwave in your neighbourhood was a curiosity, an object of both fascination and dread. You would hear stories about what it did, how it worked, what it might do to your body if you stood too close when it was operating. The radiation word got thrown around a lot, whispered like a concern, like perhaps this machine was somehow weaponized, like it was cooking food the way atomic bombs cooked cities. But alongside the fear was genuine wonder. You could reheat coffee instantly instead of placing it back on the stove. You could thaw frozen food in minutes instead of hours, planning ahead the night before. You could cook an entire meal without turning on the oven, without heating up the kitchen on a warm day, without creating that oppressive wall of heat that made summer cooking nearly impossible. Your first experience with a microwave might have been at a friend's house, or in a restaurant, or in a department store where they were demonstrated to skeptical crowds. You watched as someone placed a cold piece of food inside, closed the door, set the timer, and a few minutes later retrieved something hot. It seemed to defy the laws of cooking as you understood them. There was no flame, no hot surface, no traditional heat source, just invisible waves and food that somehow got hot anyway. It was almost magical, almost too good to be true, which was precisely why people suspected it might be dangerous. When you finally bought one, the kitchen seemed to shift around it fundamentally. It was a machine that required counter space, that needed its own outlet, that became a focal point of daily life. You read the manual carefully, partly to understand how to use it, partly because you wanted reassurance that it was safe, that the radiation warnings were exaggerated, that you wouldn't be slowly poisoning your family by using this device to heat their dinner. The manual was full of technical information about microwaves and how they functioned, explanations that didn't entirely remove your anxiety, but at least provided some framework for understanding what was happening inside the machine. The learning curve was genuinely steep. Microwave cooking required a completely different approach than conventional cooking. You couldn't just turn the setting as high as it would go and expect good results. Different foods required different power levels. Some things needed to be stirred halfway through. Some foods would explode if you microwaved them incorrectly. You learnt these lessons through trial and error, through food that came out unevenly heated with cold spots in the middle and scorching hot edges. You learned through popcorn that burned, through eggs that somehow managed to spontaneously combust inside their shells, creating a smell that lingered in your kitchen for days. You learned that you couldn't put metal in the microwave, though you had to learn this through witnessing the spectacular light show that resulted when someone tried. But you kept learning. You developed an intuitive sense for how long different foods needed. You learned that you could make popcorn in a paper bag, make it fresh and cheaper than buying the pre-popped variety. You learned that you could heat a cup of coffee in 30 seconds, eliminating the need to microwave an entire pot. You learned that you could cook an entire meal in the time it used to take to preheat the oven. The microwave wasn't just convenient, it was transformative. It changed the pace of cooking, the pace of eating, the pace of daily life, making everything faster, more immediate, more responsive to your needs. And yet the fear never quite disappeared. You maintained a respectful distance when it was operating, never quite trusting that the warnings were entirely accurate. You watched through the window as your food rotated on the turntable, half expecting something to go wrong, half amazed that it worked at all. The future, it turned out, was both wonderful and slightly terrifying, humming quietly in your kitchen, making meals faster than you'd ever imagined possible, while some part of you remained convinced that you were slowly being irradiated by proximity alone, that the convenience was being paid for in ways that wouldn't become apparent for years, that progress always came with a hidden cost. In offices and homes throughout the 70s, the water cooler arrived as both a practical appliance and something more. A social hub, a place where people gathered not just for water, but for gossip, for a moment away from their desks. It was often positioned as a symbol of modernity, of knowing that tap water needed to be cooled and filtered to be considered truly refreshing. Yet the water cooler became famous not for its engineering, but for the conversations that happened beside it, the way a simple appliance could create a gathering place in an otherwise isolating landscape. The water cooler in an office was a destination. You would rise from your desk, stretch your back, acknowledge the slight stiffness that came from sitting in one position too long, and walk across the floor toward the cooler. You weren't really there for the water, though you would take a small paper cup and fill it, sipping the cool liquid before tossing the cup into the recycling bin. You were there for the break, the legitimate excuse to step away from work, to have a moment of social contact with colleagues who might otherwise remain strangers, to participate in the informal network that held offices together. It became the place where real information travelled, the unofficial newspaper of the office. Did you hear that Margaret is leaving? Did you see what happened in the board meeting? Can you believe what the boss said about the new policy? The water cooler was where these conversations happened, in hushed tones, in the spaces between sips, in the moments when you could speak freely away from supervisors, away from the formal structures of workplace hierarchy. It was neutral territory, a place where people from different departments could gather without it seeming unusual, without anyone questioning why you were there, without there needing to be a professional justification for your presence. Some water coolers were simple, just a dispenser with a bottle of water inverted on top, the water trickling into the reservoir, cooling it until it was cold enough to drink. Others were more elaborate, with both hot and cold water, with dispensers for cups, with space around them that almost seemed designed for gathering. The best water coolers became landmarks in offices, the place everyone knew, the place to find someone if you needed them, the place where the unofficial culture of the workplace expressed itself. People would arrange to meet there. Information would be exchanged. Friendships would form. At home, the water cooler was different. It was a status symbol, a way of saying that you were modern, that you understood that water quality mattered, that you weren't content to drink directly from the tap like your parents' generation had. The water cooler in a home kitchen represented a certain level of sophistication, a recognition that water deserved to be treated as something important, something worth filtering and cooling, something worth dedicating counter space to. The sound the water cooler made was distinctive, the glug of water moving through tubes as you filled your cup, the hum of the cooling mechanism, the little drips as condensation formed on the outside of the cooler on hot days. These became familiar sounds, the soundtrack of workplace breaks, the rhythm of office life. You could hear the cooler from your desk sometimes, that faint gurgling, and it would remind you that the cooler existed, that you could get water whenever you wanted, that relief was available in measured doses. Yet the water cooler's real legacy wasn't about hydration at all. It was about creating a space for human connection in an increasingly mechanized world. The cooler itself was just a machine, functional and reliable, but what happened around it was entirely human. It was where friendships formed, where gossip circulated, where people found moments of genuine connection in their workdays, where the informal bonds that made offices tolerable were formed and maintained. Without the water cooler, offices would have been even more isolated, even more disconnected, even more purely about work and nothing else. Years later, when workplaces became more dispersed and fragmented, when people worked from home or in isolated cubicles, when the informal gathering spaces disappeared, people would look back on the water cooler era with a strange nostalgia. The water cooler had been more than a device for cooling water. It had been a symbol of community, of the informal networks that held offices together, of the way that even something as mundane as hydration could become a gathering place for human connection, could become the heart of an office's social life. The electric shaver promised to shave minutes off your morning routine, to transform the somewhat vulnerable act of shaving into something quick, efficient, and thoroughly modern. They buzzed, they hummed. They made a sound like a tiny spacecraft launching from your bathroom counter. Men who used them felt futuristic, like they were embracing progress itself, even though they were just shaving their faces slightly faster than their fathers had. The electric shaver represented something significant about the 70s, the idea that convenience mattered, that time was valuable, that a few minutes saved in the morning could add up to something meaningful across a lifetime. Your father might have spent 15 or 20 minutes with a straight razor, stropping the blade on leather, applying hot water and shaving soap with a brush, performing the ritual with almost meditative care, the bathroom steaming with hot water, the smell of aftershave hanging in the air. You could now do the same thing in 2 or 3 minutes, standing over the sink in your pajamas with a humming device, getting the job done before you'd even had your first cup of coffee. The sound was distinctive, a high-frequency buzz that filled your bathroom that could be heard through walls, that announced to the world that you were shaving. Some men found the sound irritating, a harsh electronic noise that jarred them awake. Others became attached to it, the familiar hum that signalled the beginning of the day, the mechanical assistance that made grooming quick and efficient. It became part of their morning ritual, as essential as brushing their teeth, as fundamental as showering, the sound that meant the day was officially underway. The technology seemed almost miraculous, at least at first. The tiny head of the shaver, with its oscillating or rotating blades, could cover your entire face in rapid passes. There was no cutting yourself, or at least much less risk of it. The shaver had been designed by engineers specifically to remove hair without drawing blood, to be safe and efficient in equal measure. The blades were protected behind fine mesh, creating a barrier that prevented them from catching skin while still allowing hair to pass through and be cut. Yet electric shavers required care. You had to keep them charged, or in some cases keep them plugged in. You had to clean them, rinse out the hair clippings, maintain them as you would any machine. A manual razor required nothing but water and occasionally stropping on a strop. The electric shaver demanded ongoing attention, ongoing maintenance, or it would lose its efficiency. But for most men, this was a small price to pay for the convenience of a quick, efficient shave that didn't require the ritual and care that straight razors demanded. Still, men embraced them enthusiastically. They represented progress. They represented having made it far enough in life to afford a luxury appliance for personal grooming. They represented time, the most precious commodity saved in small increments, added up across years and decades. If you saved 5 minutes every morning with an electric shaver, that was roughly 30 hours per year, hours that could be devoted to sleep, to breakfast, to sitting quietly before the day's demands took over. In bathrooms throughout the 70s, electric shavers hummed to life each morning. Some were sleek and chrome, designed to look sophisticated on the bathroom counter. Others were bulkier, with protective heads and multiple speeds for different types of facial hair. Some men had several, for different purposes, different situations, different needs. The electric shaver became as common as the toothbrush, as fundamental a part of male grooming as soap and water. It was something you expected to have, something that marked you as someone who had embraced modern convenience. And if the shave wasn't quite as close as a manual razor could provide, if there was something lost in the transformation from meditative ritual to efficient routine, if some older men insisted that electric shavers never quite got the job done as well as a proper razor, well, that seemed like a small price to pay for those extra minutes of sleep each morning, for the liberation from a task that had consumed your time and attention for centuries of human history. Imagine the liberation of being able to walk around while talking on the phone. Imagine having a conversation, while moving from room to room, while sitting in your backyard on a nice afternoon, while doing something other than standing in one fixed spot holding a receiver. The cordless telephone promised exactly this kind of freedom, and people were genuinely excited about it. The bulky handset and the base station that required a charging cradle seemed like the smallest price for this newly mobile existence. It was wireless, sort of. It was liberation, within a very limited radius. Your first cordless telephone was probably a revelation. Suddenly, you weren't tethered to the wall anymore. You could pick up the handset, leave the base station in the kitchen, and carry the phone with you as you moved through your house. You could talk while making dinner, continuing a conversation while chopping vegetables or stirring something on the stove. You could talk while sitting in your backyard, moving between chairs and flower beds, pacing as you listened. You could walk from room to room without the cord snaking behind you, catching on furniture, threatening to pull the phone off the table, creating that panic when someone called at an inopportune moment and you had to scramble to reach the phone in time before the answering machine picked up. The handset itself was substantial, heavier than a traditional phone receiver with a bulge on the back where the battery and antenna lived. The antenna was crucial. If you didn't extend it properly, the signal would drop and the other person would sound distant and garbled. If you walked too far from the base station, you would lose the connection entirely, hearing nothing but silence. The caller left, wondering if you were still there. The freedom of the cordless phone came with invisible boundaries, with dead zones in your house where the signal simply didn't reach, usually precisely where you wanted to have a conversation. And the technology was imperfect, genuinely unreliable. Cordless phones often experienced interference from neighbours' cordless phones, from microwave ovens, from other electronic devices. You would sometimes hear crosstalk, other conversations bleeding through your call, disembodied voices from somewhere else, from someone else's cordless phone on a similar frequency. It was strange, unsettling, slightly invasive. This reminder that your private conversation was travelling through the air, potentially available to anyone with the right receiver, tuned to the right frequency. Privacy became a technical challenge rather than a given. Battery life was limited and unpredictable. You had to remember to dock the handset in the charging cradle when you were done using it. Leave it out too long, and the battery would die, and you would be stuck with a dead phone, a useless device, until it had recharged for several hours. Running out of battery mid-call wasn't uncommon. You would hear the battery warning beeps, realize you had maybe 5 minutes before the phone died completely, and suddenly the liberation felt less liberating. Urgency would set in as you tried to wrap up your conversation or dash back to the base station. Still, people loved cordless phones with an intensity that surprised even them. The freedom, even limited freedom, was intoxicating. You could actually do things while you talked. You could be productive. You could multitask, one of the great promises of the 70s. You could water your plants while talking to your mother. You could fold laundry while catching up with a friend. The telephone, that stationary object that had sat on hallway tables for decades, had finally been liberated, had been given mobility, had been transformed into a tool that could accompany you through your house, through your daily life, making you perpetually available, perpetually reachable. In homes throughout the 70s, cordless phones became status symbols of a sort. They meant you had embraced technology. They meant you valued convenience and mobility. They meant you were willing to pay more for the freedom to not be anchored to the wall while talking. They represented a certain kind of forward thinking, an acceptance that the future meant constant connection, perpetual availability, the ability to be reached and to reach others from anywhere in your home. And if the call sometimes cut out, if you occasionally heard your neighbour's conversation bleed through, if you had to remember to charge it constantly, if the battery would eventually lose its capacity and need replacing, well, that was simply the price of progress. The small sacrifices you made for the privilege of walking around while talking on the telephone. The lava lamp wasn't quite a gadget in the traditional sense, but it was certainly designed to do something, to mesmerize, to create atmosphere, to suggest that you were forward-thinking enough to have something this strange in your home. They glowed in warm colours, oozing and flowing with an almost biological grace. People stared at them. They became focal points in living rooms and bedrooms, these strange glowing objects that served no purpose except to exist beautifully, and that was enough. The lava lamp arrived in the 70s like something from another planet, something that didn't belong in the practical utilitarian world of household appliances. It was colourful. It was hypnotic. It served absolutely no practical purpose. For a decade obsessed with efficiency and function, with labour-saving devices and time management, the lava lamp was a radical statement. Beauty for its own sake, form over function, decoration that was purely experiential and deliberately useless. It was rebellion dressed up as home decor. You would watch the lava lamp work, the coloured wax at the bottom heating up, becoming buoyant, rising through the clear liquid in the lamp's chamber in slow, undulating blobs. The blobs would float upward, reach the top, cool, become denser, sink back down, and the process would repeat endlessly. Hypnotically, a perpetual cycle that never seemed to get boring. There was something deeply satisfying about watching this cycle, about having a machine in your home whose only job was to be beautiful and strange, whose only purpose was to provide visual interest and contemplative space. The lava lamp required electricity, required a bulb to generate the heat that made the cycle work, but the appeal wasn't about efficiency. The appeal was about creating atmosphere, about having something in your home that was purely aesthetic, purely for enjoyment. It was a rebellion against the utilitarian logic of the decade, a small stand for beauty and uselessness in a world increasingly focused on productivity and purpose. It said something about you, that you valued beauty, that you were willing to dedicate electricity and counter space to something that accomplished nothing but looking interesting. They came in various configurations and colour combinations. Some had red lava in clear liquid, vivid and dramatic. Some had orange lava in a murky yellowish liquid, creating a warmer, more subdued effect. Some had blue lava in a yellowish liquid, the colours contrasting dramatically when the lava rose and fell, creating an almost alien landscape inside the lamp. Some were tall and thin, elegant and sophisticated. Some were short and wide, more compact, easier to hide on a shelf. The variety seemed endless, each lamp a unique object, a personal statement about taste and style and willingness to embrace the unconventional. The lava lamp became synonymous with a certain kind of 70s aesthetic, a reminder of the decade's willingness to embrace the strange and unconventional. In bedrooms and living rooms, lava lamps glowed softly through the night, their light casting strange shadows on walls, their mesmerizing cycles suggesting that decoration could be as much about psychology as about visual appeal. They became background elements in teenage bedrooms and college dorm rooms, fixtures in homes where people wanted to signal their openness to alternative culture, their rejection of conventional aesthetics. And perhaps that was the real genius of the lava lamp. It didn't try to solve any problems. It didn't make anything easier. It didn't save time or effort. It didn't increase productivity or efficiency. It simply existed, beautiful and pointless and utterly captivating, a reminder that not everything in your home had to be functional, that sometimes you could spend your money and your electricity on something purely because it made you happy to watch it flow and glow and rise and fall, endlessly, peacefully, hypnotically through your living space. A small gesture toward beauty in a world increasingly dominated by utility and purpose. Cold beds on winter nights were about to become obsolete, or so the advertisement suggested. The electric blanket promised warmth delivered directly through your bedding, a cocoon of heat you could control with a dial or buttons. People loved them. They felt futuristic, efficient, and deeply comforting. The subtle hum beneath your sheets became a familiar presence, a gentle reminder that modern technology was working on your behalf while you slept, keeping you warm through the long, cold nights. The electric blanket was revolutionary in its simplicity. You would layer it on top of your regular blankets or sheets, plug it into the outlet beside your bed, and turn it on before you climbed under the covers. By the time you slipped into bed, the blanket was warm, almost hot, creating a pocket of heat that surrounded you as you settled in for sleep. In winter, this was almost transcendent. Your bedroom was cold, your house was cold, perhaps chilly enough that you could see your breath when you first woke up, but your bed was warm, a refuge of comfort in an otherwise chilly environment. The control for the electric blanket was usually a small dial or a set of switches on a cord, allowing you to adjust the temperature to your preference with fine gradations. Some people liked it scorching hot, wanting to feel truly warm, wanting the heat to penetrate their bones. Others preferred a gentle warmth, just enough to keep them comfortable without overheating. You could turn it on high when you first got into bed, feeling the heat building beneath the layers of fabric, then dial it back once you had warmed up, finding the sweet spot where you were comfortable, but not overheating, not sweating through your night clothes. Yet electric blankets came with warnings, with stories of fires, with concerns about leaving them on too long, with cautions about keeping them away from children and pets. There was something vaguely dangerous about an electric blanket, something that required respect, that demanded you remember it was on, that compelled you to turn it off before you got out of bed in the morning. You had to be careful not to fold it or crease it, not to damage the wiring. You had to understand that this was a machine, that it required maintenance, that it could malfunction if not treated properly. The sensation of the electric blanket was unique, unlike traditional heating. It wasn't like a fireplace making a room warm, or a heater warming the air around you. This was direct warmth, absorbed through your body, the heat spreading slowly through the fabric and into your bones. Some people found it almost therapeutic, almost medicinal, the way the heat seemed to ease muscle tension, to relax aching joints, to provide comfort beyond mere warmth. For people with arthritis or back pain, the electric blanket was almost life-changing, a daily relief that made sleep more possible, and there was the hum. The electric blanket made a low humming sound as it operated, barely perceptible when you first turned it on, but once you noticed it, you couldn't unhear it. Some people found it soothing, this quiet reminder that electricity was working on their behalf, warming their beds, keeping them comfortable through the night. Others found it unsettling, this mechanical presence beneath them as they tried to sleep, this reminder that their comfort was being provided by a machine rather than generated naturally. The electric blanket also represented a shift in how people thought about comfort. Your grandmother had warmed beds with hot water bottles, filling them with boiling water and placing them between sheets, the heat dissipating gradually through the night. She had used multiple blankets, down comforters, the weight and layers providing both warmth and a sense of security. You had an electric blanket, which meant you could be warm without adding bulk to your bedding, without the weight of extra blankets, without the awkwardness of multiple layers that would slide around during the night. It was efficient, it was modern, it was a small luxury that seemed less like luxury and more like necessity once you had experienced it, once you had known what it felt like to slip into a warm bed on a cold night, to have your comfort literally wired in, waiting for you. Before the digital watch, analog clocks were standard, requiring you to interpret the position of hands, to have a basic understanding of how time was represented visually. Then came the digital watch, displaying numbers with absolute clarity. No interpretation necessary. Just read the numbers and know exactly what time it was to the minute. They were usually bulky, often with a red LED display that glowed bright enough to see in the dark. Wearing a digital watch in the 70s meant you were someone who had embraced progress, someone who read time with precision. The first digital watches were remarkable, genuinely remarkable in their clarity and modernity. The display was bright, almost garish, a red glow that seemed futuristic and slightly alien, like something out of science fiction finally made real. You would press a button and the time would appear, displayed in blocky numerals that were impossible to misread, that left no room for interpretation or approximation. No more squinting at an analog face, trying to determine whether the minute hand was pointing at the 9 or the 10, whether you had 3 minutes or 5. The digital watch made time a certainty, a matter of simple reading comprehension, a technological solution to a problem you didn't know you had. They were chunky, thick on your wrist, substantial enough that you were always aware of wearing them. But this bulk was also part of their appeal. They looked futuristic. They announced that you had embraced technology. They required batteries that were themselves revolutionary, tiny things that seemed to contain miraculous amounts of power that could keep the watch running for months or years. The digital display used barely any power at all, which meant the batteries lasted longer than anyone expected. The watch was light enough that you forgot you were wearing it, yet substantial enough that everyone could see it, could see the glowing numbers that announced what time it was with absolute authority. The early digital watches had limited functions. They showed the time, usually with hours and minutes, occasionally seconds if you were willing to sacrifice battery life. Some had date displays, small windows showing the day and date. Some had stopwatch functions for timing things. Some had alarm capabilities, a small buzzer that would vibrate or beep at a predetermined time. But they were all unified in their primary purpose: to tell time digitally, to transform the analog concept of the clock face into pure numerical display, to make timekeeping a matter of reading rather than interpretation. There was something almost transcendent about knowing the exact time to the second. Your analog watch had approximation built into it. You would estimate whether you had 3 minutes or 5 minutes before something happened, whether you had enough time to finish a task or needed to hurry. With the digital watch, you knew. You knew you had exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. You could be precise. You could be exact. You could account for every single second, could track time with a precision that would have seemed impossible before. The digital watch also represented a certain kind of status. They were expensive, far more expensive than analog watches. Wearing one meant you could afford the latest technology, that you valued precision and modernity. It meant you had accepted that the future was numerical, that time itself was becoming digital, that the world was shifting toward a language of numbers and displays rather than analog representations. It meant you understood that this shift was inevitable and desirable, and there was something satisfying about watching the seconds change on a digital display, about knowing that you could track time with unprecedented accuracy, that technology had finally solved the problem of knowing exactly what time it was. The digital watch transformed timekeeping from an art that required some level of interpretation into a simple act of reading, and in doing so, it helped shift the culture toward a more precise, more numerical understanding of how we move through our days, toward a world where time was measured and quantified and always known. The electric hot pot was a revelation for people who drank a lot of tea or coffee. Fill it with water, turn it on, and the water would heat and then stay warm throughout the day. No need to reheat, no need to wait. You always had hot water available whenever you wanted it. It was a small thing, really, but it was the kind of small thing that shaped daily life, that made routines slightly easier, slightly more efficient. The electric hot pot sat on the kitchen counter, usually positioned near the coffee supplies, creating a small station where tea and coffee could be prepared throughout the day. You would fill it with water in the morning, turn it on, and within minutes the water would be at a rolling boil, steam rising from the spout in a gentle plume. Then the pot would maintain that temperature, keep the water hot and ready for the rest of the day, gradually cooling slightly as the hours passed but never cooling completely, always available for immediate use. This eliminated the need to boil water repeatedly. You no longer had to wait for water to heat while standing at the stove, watching the flame, listening for the whistle. You no longer had to remember whether you had already turned off the kettle or not, creating that ambient anxiety about whether your house was about to catch fire from a forgotten heating element left on the burner. The electric hot pot handled all of this automatically, freeing you from the concern, from the attention, from the need to remember. The technology was simple: heating elements at the bottom of the pot, a thermostat that kept the water at a constant temperature, a simple on-off switch. Yet this simplicity created something powerful, a constant supply of hot water that transformed tea and coffee consumption for people who enjoyed multiple cups throughout the day. You could make a fresh cup of tea any time, without waiting, without the hassle of boiling water, without the delay that used to occur between deciding you wanted tea and actually having it in your hands. The sound of the electric hot pot was distinctive, a low hum interrupted by occasional clicks as the heating element cycled on and off to maintain temperature. This became background noise in kitchens, the subtle evidence that electricity was working on your behalf, keeping your water warm, ready for use. You would hear that familiar hum and know that refreshment was available, that you could have a hot drink whenever you wanted one, that convenience was humming quietly on your counter. For people who drank tea, the electric hot pot was almost life-changing. You could make a fresh cup of tea any time, without waiting, without the hassle of boiling water. You could experiment with different varieties of tea, could enjoy multiple cups throughout the day without the ritual becoming a burden. For people who entertained guests who enjoyed hot beverages, the hot pot ensured that you always had hot water available, that you could respond instantly to a request for tea or coffee, that hospitality could be offered without advance planning or waiting. The electric hot pot also represented a shift in beverage culture. With hot water always available, people drank more tea, experimented with different varieties, created routines around hot beverages in ways that wouldn't have been practical without this constant source of hot water. It enabled a certain kind of lifestyle, one where pausing for a cup of tea became a regular part of the day, rather than a special occasion that required preparation and planning. It made tea accessible, immediate, integrated into daily life. And there was something comforting about this. The electric hot pot became a companion through the workday, the thing that enabled countless cups of tea or coffee, the humble machine that sat quietly on the counter, doing one small thing incredibly well, keeping water hot, always ready, always available, a simple form of technological support that made daily routines slightly more comfortable, slightly more fluid, slightly more humane. In kitchens throughout the 70s, electric hot pots hummed quietly, keeping water warm, ready for use, a small but essential part of daily life, proof that even the simplest innovations could significantly improve the quality of everyday existence. The crockpot promised something almost magical. You could prepare a meal in the morning, turn it on low, and come home 8 hours later to a house that smelled like dinner and a meal that was already prepared. It was slow cooking, mechanized, democratized, made accessible to people who didn't have time to stand over a stove. You simply layered ingredients, added liquid, and let electricity and heat do the work while you lived your life elsewhere. The appeal was almost impossible to resist. You would wake up, gather your ingredients while still in your pajamas, add them to the ceramic insert that was waiting on your counter. You would add meat, vegetables, stock, perhaps some herbs or spices, layering them without any particular technique or expertise required. Then you would set the dial to low, plug the machine in, and leave for work. All day while you were at your job, while your children were at school, while you were stuck in traffic or sitting in meetings or dealing with the demands of your working life, The crock pot would be working quietly in your kitchen, transforming raw ingredients into something soft and flavourful and ready to eat the moment you walk through the door. There was something deeply satisfying about this arrangement, almost thrilling in its implications. Cooking, that most time-consuming of household tasks, had been compressed into a few minutes of preparation in the morning and then hours of passive waiting. You weren't actually cooking. You were delegating cooking to a machine, trusting that the slow heat and moisture would accomplish what hours of active cooking used to require. It was liberation from the kitchen, freedom from the most tedious part of housekeeping, permission to focus on other aspects of your life without the nagging awareness that you still had to prepare dinner. The crock-pot became a ritual for many households, something you organised your week around. Sunday morning preparation before a long work week, layering meat, vegetables, stock, perhaps some herbs or spices. Setting the timer, knowing that dinner would be waiting for you, that you wouldn't have to scramble to prepare a meal after a long day, that food would simply be there, warm and ready to serve, ready to eat. It simplified the end of your day dramatically, transformed dinner from a challenge into something that was already solved, already handled, already waiting for you. The smell was part of the appeal, perhaps the most important part. Coming home to the aroma of a stew that had been cooking for 8 hours, that had filled your house with warmth and anticipation, was almost transcendent. Your neighbours could tell you had a crock pot by the smell drifting from your house. That distinctive aroma of slow-cooked meat and vegetables that seemed to promise comfort and nourishment, that made everyone who entered your home feel like something good was about to happen. And the meals were reliable in a way that cooking from scratch never quite was. Tough cuts of meat, the cheaper cuts that required hours of cooking to become tender, would become tender in the crock pot. Cheaper ingredients would taste expensive, would taste like they had been prepared with care and attention. The slow, moist heat transformed everything it touched into something palatable, something that tasted like it had been prepared with care, when in reality you had spent maybe 5 minutes preparing it that morning while drinking your coffee. The crockpot also democratized cooking in a way nothing else had accomplished. You didn't need technique, you didn't need precise timing, you didn't need to know the secrets of braising or stewing, the ways that professional chefs achieved tender, flavorful results. You just needed to follow a recipe, layer your ingredients in the correct order, add the right amount of liquid, and trust the machine. Home cooks could achieve results that used to require skill and experience and hours of attention, could produce meals that would have impressed people years ago, could feed their families well without possessing any particular culinary expertise. Yet the crock-pot created new anxieties alongside its conveniences. What if you had the dial on the wrong setting? What if 8 hours was too long and your meal turned to mush, the meat disintegrating, the vegetables becoming almost unrecognizable? What if you had added the wrong amount of liquid and ended up with a soup instead of a stew? What if you forgot to plug it in and came home to raw ingredients and the realization that dinner wasn't going to happen? The machine's promise of infallibility also created the fear that something could go wrong, that you might come home to a disaster instead of dinner. Still, people embraced it enthusiastically, sometimes obsessively. They bought multiple crock pots in different sizes for different purposes, a large one for family meals, a smaller one for side dishes, perhaps a third for entertaining. They collected crock-pot recipes, shared them with friends, swapped experiences about what worked and what didn't, what cooking times worked best, which flavour combinations were successful. The crock-pot became a staple of 70s kitchens, a symbol of efficiency, a promise that you could feed your family well without sacrificing your time or your energy, without coming home exhausted and then having to cook for another hour. It represented hope, the possibility that technology could genuinely improve daily life, could make the difficult parts easier, could give people back time that had previously been consumed by necessary labour. And on evenings when you walked through your door, tired from work and were greeted by that familiar smell, by a meal that was already prepared and waiting for you, that was hot and delicious and ready to serve, it felt like nothing short of magic, like the future had finally arrived, and the future smelled like dinner, like comfort, like the possibility of a meal that nourished rather than stressed. The electric knife was designed to make carving roasts and poultry easier, with two serrated blades that vibrated rapidly, doing the work that had previously required skill, strength, and a steady hand. They were loud, startlingly so, filling the dining room with a high-pitched whine as you slowly moved them through meat. Yet there was something appealing about not having to do this work yourself, about letting electricity handle what had always been a manual task. Thanksgiving dinner in homes throughout the 70s included this new ritual, the electric knife appearing at the table, the carving of the turkey transformed from a solo performance requiring years of practice into a mechanical process that anyone could perform. The ceremonial moment when the host would stand at the head of the table, carving knife in hand, was being replaced by something more egalitarian, more accessible, but also somehow less ritualistic, less personally meaningful. The skill that had been passed down through generations was being replaced by a machine that required no expertise whatsoever. The electric knife was intimidating at first. The serrated blades vibrated so rapidly they seemed barely controlled, like they might spin out of your grasp and cause catastrophic damage. The whine they made was almost violent, aggressive, a sound that didn't seem to belong in the domestic space of a dining room. Yet despite the intimidation factor, despite the noise and the general sense of minor danger, despite the way the machine made you nervous, people embraced these devices. They represented progress. They represented having made it far enough to afford modern conveniences. They represented the future. Using an electric knife required a different technique than a traditional carving knife. You couldn't use pressure the way you might with a manual blade, pressing down hard to cut through meat. Instead, you let the vibrating blades do the work, moving them slowly and steadily through the meat, letting the blade's motion rather than your own strength do the cutting. It was almost passive in a way, this act of allowing the machine to carve your roast, of trusting the technology to do what your hands had once done, of surrendering control to the machine. The results were impressive, consistently impressive. Uniform slices of meat, consistent thickness, lines that looked almost professional, almost like something from a butcher shop. A roast that had taken your father or grandfather hours of practice to carve properly could now be carved acceptably by someone using an electric knife for the first time. The skill had been transferred from the human to the machine, the expertise built into the vibrating blades. What took years to master could now be accomplished by anyone. Yet something was lost in this transfer, something that people didn't always acknowledge but sometimes felt. There was no artistry to using an electric knife, no personal mastery being displayed, no sense that you'd spent years learning to do this task well. It was just technique, repetitive motion, letting the machine handle the work. Some older cooks resisted the electric knife precisely for this reason, felt that it was stripping away something essential from the act of carving, reducing it to mere mechanics, commodifying a skill that had once been part of family tradition and personal accomplishment. Still, the electric knife persisted, became increasingly common, eventually became standard in many kitchens. It was practical, it worked, it delivered consistent results. And for people who didn't care about tradition or artistry, who simply wanted to get the job done quickly and efficiently, who wanted to avoid the embarrassment of a poorly carved turkey in front of dinner guests, the electric knife was perfect. It was democratic. It made carving accessible to anyone. The sound, that distinctive high-pitched whine, became associated with holiday meals. with the moment when dinner was about to be served, when the main course was being prepared for consumption. Some found the sound jarring, unpleasant, a mechanical intrusion into what should have been an intimate family moment. Others barely noticed it anymore, so accustomed to this new normal that the absence of the electric knife would have seemed strange, would have felt like something was missing from the ritual. And in kitchens throughout the 70s, the electric knife sat ready, a tool designed to solve a problem that had existed since humans first roasted meat, that had required generations to master, transformed into a task that a child could handle, a machine that took away the burden of skill and left only the simple act of guiding blades through meat, rapidly, efficiently, loudly, making everyone equal in the face of the carving task. It represented the democratization of culinary skill, the idea that you didn't need training or practice, or years of experience to accomplish important cooking tasks. Picture this. You set the coffee maker the night before, load it with grounds and water, program the timer, and wake up to the smell of fresh coffee already made. This was convenience on a level that seemed almost impossible. The idea that your appliances could anticipate your needs, that your morning could be slightly less chaotic because machinery was working on your behalf while you slept. The gurgling sound of coffee brewing became a gentle alarm, a signal that the day was truly beginning. This was the dream that the automatic coffee maker with a timer promised. No more stumbling around a dark kitchen in your pajamas, no more waiting for coffee to brew before you could think clearly, no more rushing to get ready before the coffee was ready. Instead, you would wake to the smell that would pull you out of sleep more gently than any alarm clock. The aroma of fresh coffee signalling that it was time to rise, that the day was beginning, that you had been prepared for by your own appliance. The technology was straightforward but felt revolutionary. You would fill the water reservoir the night before, add your grounds to the filter basket, set the dial on the timer to your desired wake-up time, and plug the machine in. While you slept, the timer would count down the hours, measuring time with quiet precision. At your chosen time, the heating element would activate. Water would begin to flow through the grounds. The familiar sounds of brewing would commence, and the coffee would start brewing, filling your kitchen with warmth and aroma by the time your alarm clock went off, sometimes even before it went off. This represented a significant shift in how people thought about morning routines, about the beginning of the day. Coffee went from being something you had to actively prepare, something that delayed the rest of your morning, to something that was simply waiting for you, ready to be consumed the moment you could hold a cup without spilling it down yourself. It was there. It was ready. It was hot. The most difficult part of waking up had been handled while you slept. The sound of the coffee maker was part of the experience, the initial hum as the timer activated, the gentle hiss and gurgle as water heated and began to drip through the grounds, the final silence as the last of the coffee dripped into the pot, the brewing complete, the appliance done with its work. These sounds became part of your morning soundtrack, the rhythm that signaled the day's beginning, the familiar sequence that told you everything was proceeding according to plan, and the smell, the rich aroma of brewing coffee filling your bedroom, drifting through your house, pulling you toward consciousness more gradually than a jarring alarm, more gently than any noise. There was something almost hedonistic about this, about waking to a smell that promised comfort and caffeine, about being welcomed into the day by your own appliance, about having given your coffee maker instructions to prepare for your arrival. Some people became obsessive about their coffee maker's timing, adjusting it seasonally to account for changes in sunrise, experimenting with different grind settings and water temperatures, trying to dial in the perfect cup. Others simply set it and forgot about it, confident that their machine would deliver something drinkable when morning arrived. A few people even experimented with different coffee beans, different ratios of ground to water, trying to achieve the perfect morning experience through trial and error. The automatic coffee maker with a timer represented a kind of trust in technology that the 70s embodied perfectly. You were trusting an appliance with a crucial part of your morning, trusting that it wouldn't malfunction, that it would remember the timer, that it would deliver coffee to your standards without any intervention from you during the night. And for the most part, these machines kept that trust, becoming reliable companions through millions of mornings, enabling countless people to face their days with caffeine and the knowledge that at least one part of their morning had been automated, had been handled by a machine, leaving them to focus on the parts of life that still required their direct attention and effort. The coffee maker became as essential to morning as consciousness itself. Before voicemail, if you missed a call, you missed it. The person on the other end would just get silence or a busy signal. The answering machine changed everything. Now people could leave you messages. You could come home to a blinking light that meant someone had tried to reach you. It was revolutionary in its way. This idea that you didn't have to be home to receive a message, that distance could be bridged through technology and magnetic tape. The answering machine was a box that sat beside your telephone, usually in the kitchen or hallway, wherever the phone was positioned in your home. It had a light that blinked when messages waited for you. A simple indicator that demanded your attention the moment you returned home. There was something almost thrilling about seeing that light blink, the anticipation of knowing that someone had tried to reach you, that your absence hadn't erased the connection, that the world hadn't simply moved on without you. The technology was mechanical and imperfect. The machine would record messages on a cassette tape that had limited space, limited time for storage. If you had too many messages, or if you didn't retrieve them, the tape would become full, and new callers would get a message saying your machine was full, come back later. There was an art to managing your messages, to listening to them promptly, to deleting the ones you didn't need to keep, to organizing your recorded communications like a small archivist managing important documents. The outgoing message was another performance entirely, something people spent considerable time perfecting. You had to create a message that was welcoming but professional, friendly but brief, something that would satisfy a caller that they had reached the right number and that you would get back to them. Some people agonized over these messages, trying to strike the right tone, recording multiple takes, listening back, making adjustments. Others kept them simple and straightforward. Some recorded funny messages, jokes or witticisms that they found amusing, though callers often found them irritating. The answering machine represented a significant change in communication patterns and social expectations. Before it, if you weren't home, you were unreachable. After it, you were always reachable, at least to the extent that someone could leave you a message, could record their words and have them waiting for you. It meant that communication could be asynchronous, that people could connect with you even when you weren't present, that you could maintain contact with the world even when you were away from your phone, even when you were unavailable in the moment. Yet the answering machine also created new anxieties. What if someone called and you didn't get back to them? What if they thought you were ignoring them? What if their message got erased by accident before you heard it? What if you misunderstood their message and responded to the wrong thing? The machine that was supposed to eliminate missed connections sometimes created new possibilities for miscommunication and misunderstanding, new opportunities for things to go wrong. Still, people became dependent on them, sometimes desperately so. Missing your messages became a source of stress. Not having an answering machine meant you might miss important calls, might seem unreliable, might fail to be reached when you needed to be. The answering machine became a necessity, a way to prove that you were still available even when you were absent, that you could be reached, that communication could still happen, that you were present in spirit even when you were absent in body. And the blinking light became a signal, a small indicator that the world beyond your home was trying to reach you. that connections were being made even in your absence, that the answering machine stood guard over your messages like a faithful servant, preserving your communication, ensuring that nothing was lost, that you could return home and immediately know whether the world had called, whether anyone had thought of you, whether you mattered to the outside world. It was a technological solution to distance, a mechanical answer to the problem of separation. For aching muscles and menstrual cramps, the heating pad provided targeted warmth through an electric element. You laid it on the affected area, turned it on, and let heat do what time and rest might eventually accomplish anyway. There was something comforting about this, about using technology in such an immediate physical way, about having a device designed specifically for bodily comfort. The heating pad was usually rectangular, cloth covered in faded cotton or worn fabric, with a control attached by a cord that allowed you to adjust the temperature. You could have it very hot, almost painfully hot, or you could have it set to a gentle warmth depending on what you needed, depending on your tolerance for heat, depending on how severe the pain was. The dial or buttons gave you control, allowed you to fine-tune the experience, to find the perfect temperature for your specific situation. There was an intimacy to using a heating pad that other appliances didn't offer. You held it against your body. You felt the warmth seeping into your muscles, into your bones, the gradual relaxation that came from sustained heat. Some people found this almost meditative, this quiet act of applying warmth to pain, of doing something tangible and immediate to address discomfort, of taking active steps to improve their situation rather than simply enduring. The heating pad also represented a moment of permitted rest, of allowing yourself to acknowledge that something hurt and to address it. In cultures that valued productivity and movement, that emphasized pushing through discomfort and not complaining, taking time to sit with a heating pad was a small rebellion. It was a way of saying that your comfort mattered, that your pain was worth addressing, that you were allowed to pause, that your body's needs were legitimate and deserved attention. For people with chronic pain, the heating pad became a constant companion. They might use it daily, might depend on it to manage discomfort, might feel its absence acutely if they didn't have one available. The heating pad was low-tech but effective, a simple application of heat that worked because of basic physics, because warmth reduced pain and improved comfort, because heat was therapeutic in ways that modern medicine sometimes overlooked or dismissed. The smell of the heating pad was distinctive too. The warm cloth, sometimes slightly plasticky, the faint scent of electricity running through wire, the aroma that accompanied warmth. Some people found it unpleasant, slightly chemical, a reminder that this was a machine and not a natural source of heat. Others found it comforting, associated it with relief, with moments of self-care in lives that often didn't permit much rest. And there was something democratic about the heating pad. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't complicated, it didn't require expertise to use. Anyone could benefit from it. Anyone could place it on an aching shoulder or lower back or abdomen and feel relief, could let the warmth do its work, could take a moment to care for themselves in a simple, direct way. It was available to rich and poor alike, effective for everyone, a technology that served human comfort without pretension or complexity. The heating pad represented the idea that technology could serve comfort, that machines could be designed not just for efficiency or productivity but for care, that an electrical device could be something as gentle and nurturing as a heated blanket or a warm embrace, that sometimes the most important technological advance wasn't about speed or convenience, but about simple, sustained, targeted warmth applied to places where people hurt. In homes throughout the 70s, heating pads glowed softly, doing their quiet work, making pain slightly more bearable, making rest slightly more possible, making life slightly more comfortable for everyone who used them. They demonstrated that not all technology had to be flashy or complex, that sometimes the best innovations were simple applications of basic principles designed to make human life more bearable, more comfortable, more humane. Before electric mixers were common in home kitchens, mixing batter meant actual physical labour, beating eggs and cream and flour with a wooden spoon or an older manual hand mixer. Your arm would ache. Your shoulder would burn. The work would take forever, and you would end up with a sore arm and a batter that still didn't seem quite right. The electric mixer changed this, spinning bowls of ingredients into smooth, creamy bases for cakes and cookies. It was efficiency applied to baking, modernisation applied to one of the home's most traditional activities. The electric mixer sat on the counter, usually positioned near your baking supplies, ready for the moment when you decided to bake. It was substantial, weighty, not something you would move often. Its base held the motor, its stand held the bowl, its attachments, beaters, dough hooks, whisks hung nearby, ready to be deployed as needed. The whole apparatus suggested serious intent, serious capability, serious commitment to baking. It was a machine that took up space and demanded respect. Using an electric mixer was almost transformative, changing the experience of baking fundamentally. Tasks that used to take 10 or 15 minutes of vigorous arm work could now be accomplished in a minute or two. Cream that would have taken actual effort to whip into peaks could be whipped in seconds, the mixer transforming liquid cream into something light and airy and substantial. Dough that would have required kneading by hand for 10 minutes could be kneaded by the machine. Your arms spared the effort, your attention freed for other tasks. And there was something satisfying about watching the mixer work. You would load your ingredients into the bowl, attach the appropriate beater, turn the machine on, and watch as it performed its task with mechanical precision. The bowl would rotate slowly while the beaters spun, gradually transforming your ingredients into the desired consistency. You could watch the transformation happen, could see the mixture going from separate components to unified whole, could observe the magic of mixing happening before your eyes. The sound was distinctive, a gentle motor hum underlying the sound of the beaters moving through the mixture, the faint slap of beaters against the bowl sides as they moved through the batter. Some mixers had multiple speeds, allowing you to start slow and increase speed as needed, giving you control over the process. You could pulse the mixer for gentle mixing or let it run on high for vigorous beating. Yet the electric mixer also required care and understanding. Overmixing was easy to do, something you had to watch for carefully. You could end up with dough that was too tough or batters that were overworked. Learning to use the mixer well, learning when to stop, learning the right speed for different tasks took some trial and error. You had to pay attention even though the machine was doing the work. Still, people embraced them enthusiastically. Baking became more common, more accessible, less physically demanding. People who had previously avoided baking because of the physical effort involved now felt empowered to attempt it. The electric mixer lowered the barrier to entry, made baking seem achievable to people who didn't have the strength or the stamina for hand mixing. It democratized baking in the same way other appliances democratize cooking. And there was something beautiful about the democratization of baking that the electric mixer enabled. It meant that anyone could bake. That physical strength wasn't a prerequisite for creating cakes and cookies, that the pleasure of baking could be shared more widely. The electric mixer represented progress not just in efficiency, but in accessibility, in making culinary arts available to people who might otherwise have been excluded by physical limitations, in opening doors that had previously been closed. In homes throughout the 70s, electric mixers whirred and spun, transforming ingredients, liberating arms, making baking accessible to everyone who wanted to try. The humidifier was a device that promised to fix the dry air of winter, to add moisture to rooms where the heating system had sucked all humidity away. It sat in corners, gurgling quietly, emitting a fine mist that promised comfort, that suggested you could control the very atmosphere of your home, that technology could make your environment more comfortable in ways that nature alone could not. The humidifier operated on a simple principle. Water evaporates into the air, increasing humidity, making the air feel less dry, making breathing easier, making your skin feel less tight and uncomfortable. In winter, when indoor heating created brutally dry conditions, when you would wake up with a throat that felt like sandpaper, when your skin would crack from dryness, the humidifier could transform a bedroom or living room into a more comfortable space. It could make the difference between a good night's sleep and waking up exhausted. The process of using a humidifier was straightforward but required attention. You would fill the reservoir with water, usually from the tap, plug the machine in, and turn it on. Water would be drawn up into the humidifier's chamber, where it would be heated or mechanically dispersed into a fine mist that would drift into the room. Within minutes you could see the mist, could feel it on your skin, could notice the change in the air quality. The sound of the humidifier was gentle, meditative, almost soothing. The quiet gurgling of water moving through the machine, the faint hiss of mist being released into the air. Some people found this sound deeply comforting, played it almost like white noise, found in its gentle rhythm a reminder that their environment was being actively managed, being improved through technology. It became a companion sound, something you would miss if the humidifier broke. And there was something almost miraculous about the effect. You could literally see the mist rising from the humidifier, filling the room with moisture spreading through the space. You could feel it on your skin, the air becoming softer, less harsh. Your nasal passages would clear slightly. Your throat would feel less dry. The general discomfort of winter's dry air would ease. You could breathe more easily. You could sleep more comfortably. Regular cleaning of the humidifier was necessary, though. Something many people neglected until they had to. Mineral deposits would accumulate from tap water, building up on the heating elements and in the chamber. Mold could grow in the water reservoir if the machine wasn't maintained properly, if water was allowed to sit too long between cleanings. But for people willing to do the maintenance, the humidifier was worth it. A technological intervention that made winter more bearable, that transformed the dry season from something to endure into something manageable. And in bedrooms throughout the 70s, humidifiers emitted their quiet mist, filling the air with moisture, making breathing easier, making sleep more comfortable, a small technological miracle working quietly through the night. They improved the very air people breathed, made their environment more livable through the intervention of electricity and water and engineering. They represented the promise of technology, that even something as fundamental as the air you breathed could be improved, could be controlled, could be made more comfortable. Through the right appliance in the right place at the right time, the automatic waffle maker was a device that took the guesswork out of breakfast. You poured batter in, closed the lid, and waited for the perfect moment when the machine told you the waffles were done. No more checking them manually. No more accidentally opening the lid too soon and ruining your waffles. Just perfectly golden waffles, delivered with mechanical precision, making breakfast both easier and somehow more impressive. The automatic waffle maker represented a significant evolution in breakfast technology. Before it, making waffles was a process that required attention, timing, intuition. You would heat your manual iron, often on the stovetop itself, adding to the chaos of breakfast preparation. You would pour in batter, wait an amount of time that varied depending on how hot the iron was, how much batter you had used. A dozen subtle variables that required experience to manage. Some waffles would come out burnt on one side and underdone on the other. Some would stick, some would break apart when you tried to remove them. The automatic waffle maker simplified this dramatically, almost absurdly. It had sensors built in, thermostats that maintained precise temperatures, lights, or signals that let you know exactly when the waffles were done. You poured batter, closed the lid, and then you didn't have to think about it. The machine would alert you when perfection had been achieved, sometimes with a bell, sometimes with a light, sometimes simply by stopping its heating cycle. The result was remarkably consistent. Every waffle came out nearly identical, golden brown on the outside, crispy on the outside, but tender on the inside. There was no guesswork, no failed batches, no waffles that were burnt on one side and underdone on the other. Just perfect waffles, every time delivered with mechanical reliability. You could make waffles for your family without worrying whether they would turn out well. And there was something satisfying about this, about breakfast being transformed from a somewhat unpredictable process into something controlled and consistent. Making waffles became easier, faster, more accessible to people who didn't have the experience to manage the timing intuitively. It meant that anyone could make good waffles, that skill and experience weren't prerequisites for quality breakfast. The sound of the waffle maker signalling that the waffles were done became a familiar kitchen sound, the chime or beep that said breakfast was ready, that the meal was complete, that perfection had been achieved. The smell of waffles cooking was incomparable, filling the house with anticipation, pulling people toward the kitchen, making everyone hungry. Yet something was lost in this transition to automatic. There was no longer any skill involved in waffle making, no opportunity to develop timing or intuition, no moment of individual craft where you could distinguish your waffles from anyone else's. The automatic waffle maker made all waffles essentially the same, standardized, perfect in their mechanical consistency. Personality was removed from the process. Still, people loved them. Breakfast could be reliable, could be good, could be consistent. And for busy mornings, for people who didn't have time to fiddle with manual waffle irons, the automatic waffle maker was a revelation, making a special breakfast something that could be accomplished in minutes rather than requiring careful attention and experience. It democratized waffles, made them available to anyone with electricity and batter, ensured that weekend breakfast would be satisfying and impressive without requiring skill or practice. The electric clothes dryer represented a significant shift in how Americans did laundry. No more hanging clothes outside to dry in the sun and wind, no more checking the weather forecast before committing to wash day, no more being at the mercy of the weather. Instead, you could dry your clothes any time, any day, guaranteed to be dry and warm and ready to wear. It was liberation from nature's schedule, technology imposing its own timeline on the ancient task of drying fabric. The electric dryer was a marvel of convenience. You would transfer your wet clothes from the washing machine, load them into the drum, set the temperature and duration, and push start. The dryer would tumble them gently, blowing heated air through the drum, evaporating moisture, leaving your clothes warm and dry and ready to wear or fold. The whole process was automated, predictable, reliable. The process took an hour or so, depending on the load size and how wet the clothes were. You didn't have to be present for any of it. You could load the dryer and forget about it, go about your day, return when it was done. The dryer would shut off automatically, leaving your clothes warm and ready, not left outside to cool or develop wrinkles. You could dry clothes on schedule rather than on nature's schedule. This represented genuine liberation from physical labour. Hanging clothes outside meant wringing them out thoroughly, carrying heavy loads to the clothesline, pegging each item carefully, waiting for the weather to cooperate, checking on the clothes periodically, retrieving them at the right moment so they wouldn't be left out in the dew or the evening moisture. The dryer eliminated all of this work, all of this attention, all of this dependence on factors beyond your control. The sound of the dryer became a familiar household sound, the gentle tumbling, the occasional metallic clink of a zipper or a snap, the hum of the heating element. The smell was distinctive too, warm fabric, the faint chemical scent of whatever fabric softener or dryer sheets people used, sometimes the more neutral smell of hot fabric, and the convenience was remarkable, transformative. You could dry clothes on rainy days, on humid days, any day at all. You could dry clothes late at night, early in the morning, whenever you wanted. The weather no longer mattered. Moisture no longer mattered. The dryer controlled the environment, creating conditions that would dry almost anything. You could dry delicate things without worrying about the sun fading them. You could dry towels without waiting for hours. Yet clotheslines weren't abandoned entirely. Some people still preferred line-dried clothes, valued the fresh scent of air drying, appreciated the gentleness of the process, enjoyed the outdoor time involved. But for most people, the dryer became standard, became something you couldn't imagine living without once you had experienced its convenience. It became as essential as the washing machine itself, a necessary appliance that transformed laundry from an all-day project into something that could be completed in a couple of hours. And in laundry rooms throughout the 70s, electric dryers hummed along, transforming wet fabric into dry clothes, mechanizing one of humanity's oldest household tasks, making it faster and easier and available regardless of weather, regardless of season, regardless of anything except the presence of electricity to power the transformation. They freed people from clotheslines, freed them from dependence on weather, freed them from work that had consumed hours of their lives for centuries. The electric fan promised cool air on demand, a way to beat the heat without air conditioning, or to supplement it. They oscillated, swinging back and forth to distribute their gentle breeze throughout a room. They were simple, really, but effective, and they became ubiquitous in homes throughout the 70s, their gentle whirring becoming the sound of summer itself. The electric fan was often the first line of defense against summer heat, especially in homes that didn't have air conditioning. You would position it strategically in a room, plug it in, and suddenly you had a breeze, artificial and created by machinery, but nonetheless effective at moving air, at creating circulation, at making the room feel marginally cooler than it was. The psychological effect was often as important as the actual cooling effect. The oscillating fans were particularly clever. Rather than blowing air in one fixed direction, they would sweep back and forth, distributing the breeze across a broader area of the room. A single fan could create airflow that affected multiple people, that made a difference in how hot a space felt. You could position it to move air across where you were sitting, to create a cross breeze when combined with an open window, to make a hot room barely tolerable. The sound of the fan was distinctive, a gentle humming that became almost meditative, almost white noise. Many people found it soothing, found it conducive to sleep, used fans as much for the sound they created as for the cooling effect they provided. The sound became associated with summer, with heat, with the rhythm of hot days. Some people couldn't sleep without the familiar whir of the fan beside their bed. Fans came in various sizes and styles. Desk fans were small, designed to cool a limited area, perfect for personal cooling when you didn't want to cool the entire room. Floor fans were larger, more substantial, capable of moving more air, filling a room with breeze. Box fans were utilitarian, purely functional, often placed in windows to move air in and out of the house. Tower fans were newer, more modern-looking, trying to blend in with home decor while providing the cooling function. The placement of a fan mattered significantly. Positioned in a window facing outward, it could pull cool air from outside into the house. Positioned facing inward, it could push warm air out. Positioned to create a cross breeze between two windows, it could generate effective cooling through simple air circulation. People became strategic about fan placement. trying to optimize their cooling effect, trying to use these simple machines as effectively as possible to fight summer heat without the expense or complexity of air conditioning. And there was something deeply satisfying about the immediacy of the fan's effect. Turn it on, and instantly you felt breeze, felt cooler, felt the heat lifted slightly. It was direct cause and effect, a machine that did exactly what it promised. No complications, no hidden functions, just pure cooling power delivered through rotating blades and an electric motor. It was reliable, it was predictable, it worked. Fans were affordable, reliable, something almost everyone could have. They didn't require installation. They didn't require maintenance beyond occasional dusting. They simply worked year after year, providing cool air, providing relief, providing comfort during the hottest months of the year, asking only electricity in return for their service. They remained reliable companions through countless summers, humming quietly, doing their simple job well, making heat bearable, making life comfortable, proving that sometimes the simplest technologies were the most effective, that sometimes the best innovations were not complicated solutions to complex problems, but simple, elegant applications of basic principles. Making ice had always been one of those small household tasks that required forethought and planning. You would fill plastic trays with water, place them in the freezer, wait hours for the water to freeze solid, then twist the tray to release the cubes into a container. If you ran out of ice, you were simply out of ice until you had time to make more. The electric ice maker changed everything, producing fresh ice cubes continuously, ensuring that you never ran out, that ice was always available whenever you needed it. This was convenience applied to a task so small and routine that you barely thought about it until you didn't have ice, and suddenly realized how much you missed it. The electric ice maker was usually a unit that attached to your refrigerator, either built in as part of a newer model or added as an attachment to an older one. You would fill the reservoir with water, plug it in, and the machine would work automatically, creating ice cubes on a schedule, depositing them into a collection bin inside the freezer. You could reach into the freezer and grab ice whenever you wanted it, without having to remember to fill trays, without having to wait, without having to plan ahead. The sound of the ice maker was distinctive. The whirring and clicking as it cycled through its process, the sound of water being frozen, the mechanical precision of ice being ejected into the collection bin. Some people found this sound slightly mechanical and unsettling, a reminder that their ice was being manufactured rather than naturally frozen. Others became attached to it, the familiar noise announcing that ice was being made, that the machine was working on their behalf, that they would have ice available, and the convenience was real and significant. For families that used a lot of ice, for people who regularly made cold drinks, for anyone who entertained guests in the summer, the ice maker was transformative. No more running out of ice mid-party, no more improvising with partially frozen water that wasn't quite cubes. Just ice, always available, always fresh, always ready. Yet the ice maker required maintenance that many people didn't realize until they experienced problems. The water line could freeze or clog. The mechanism could jam if the ice wasn't removed regularly. If you left the machine running too long without using the ice, you might end up with a bin full of large fused ice masses that were difficult to break apart. But for people willing to understand and maintain their ice maker, it was worth the effort. A small convenience that became essential once you had experienced it. The ice cubes themselves seemed better quality than homemade ones, more uniform, more consistently sized, more reliably solid. They didn't have the cloudy appearance of tap water ice. They froze more completely, lasted longer in a drink, cooled beverages more effectively. The machine seemed to have solved ice in a way that manual production never quite could, had created the ideal ice cube, standardized and perfect. In homes throughout the 70s, electric ice makers hummed away in refrigerators, producing cubes silently and invisibly, ensuring that ice was always available, that summer drinks could be properly chilled, that entertaining didn't require advanced ice preparation. They represented the promise of automation, that even the smallest, most routine tasks could be mechanized, that convenience could be manufactured, that the future meant never running out of anything you needed because machines would produce it for you endlessly. The ice maker also represented a kind of abundance that the 70s embodied. You didn't have to ration ice. You didn't have to worry about running out. You could use as much as you wanted, make as many cold drinks as you wanted, entertain as many guests as you wanted, because ice production was now unlimited, automatic, available on demand. It was a small taste of a future where scarcity would be eliminated, where machines would provide everything, where human wants would be perpetually satisfied through technology. The blanket warmer was a cousin to the electric blanket, a device designed to do something slightly different but equally appealing. Warm your blankets while you slept, so that when you woke up, you could emerge from your cocoon of heat into your cold bedroom, wrapped in warmth. It was perhaps the most luxurious of all the warming devices, designed purely for comfort with no utility beyond that. The blanket warmer was usually a wooden rack or stand, with heated bars running horizontally, creating space for blankets to be draped across it. You would turn it on before bed, let it heat up, then place your blankets on the bars, while you slept. The machine would gently warm them, so that when morning came and you had to rise from your warm bed and face your cold house, you could grab your pre-warmed blankets and wrap yourself in them, creating a cocoon of continued warmth as you moved from bedroom to kitchen to bathroom. The sensation was almost indescribable, wrapping yourself in blankets that were already warm, that had been anticipating your morning transition, that had been waiting to comfort you. There was something almost maternal about it, something deeply soothing about emerging into a cold world and immediately being surrounded by warmth. It transformed the morning transition from something difficult and uncomfortable into something pleasant, something to look forward to. Yet the blanket warmer was perhaps the most impractical of all the appliances in this era, the one that most clearly demonstrated the commitment to comfort over utility. It served no purpose except making blankets warm. It wasn't essential. It didn't solve any real problems. It was pure luxury, pure convenience, pure commitment to comfort. It represented the belief that your quality of life was worth investing in, that your morning comfort mattered enough to dedicate electricity and appliances to. In homes where people could afford them, blanket warmers became almost addiction-inducing. People became dependent on them, couldn't imagine winter without them, felt almost betrayed on the occasions when the machine broke or wasn't available. They represented the promise of technology, that machines could serve human comfort, that electricity could be devoted entirely to pleasure, that the future meant never being uncomfortable if you had the right appliances. The warmth of the blankets as you wrapped yourself in them on a cold morning was transformative. The transition from sleep to waking became less jarring, less uncomfortable. The shock of cold air as you rose from bed was mitigated by the immediate warmth of pre-warmed blankets. It was a small thing, really, but it made mornings better, made winter more tolerable, made the daily cycle of sleep and waking slightly more pleasant. Some blanket warmers had adjustable heat settings, allowing you to control how warm the blankets became, to customize the experience to your preferences. Others were simpler, with just a basic on-off switch, but all of them shared the same basic function: making blankets warm, preparing them for your use, anticipating your needs. And in bedrooms throughout the 70s, blanket warmers stood quietly, doing their simple work, warming blankets, waiting for morning, ready to provide comfort and luxury to people who had decided that their morning transitions deserved to be as pleasant as their bedtimes. They were monuments to the belief that technology should serve not just productivity but pleasure, that convenience could mean comfort, that the good life meant having warm blankets waiting for you in the morning, that sometimes the best use of electricity was not to do necessary work, but simply to make life more pleasant, more comfortable, more enjoyable. The electric roasting pan, sometimes called a roaster oven, was designed to do what a conventional oven did, but in a smaller, more portable form. You could roast a chicken, bake a casserole, warm rolls, cook an entire meal, all without heating up your kitchen the way a full-sized oven would. It sat on your countertop, looking somewhat like a toaster oven, but larger, more substantial, with enough capacity to handle serious cooking tasks. The electric roasting pan was particularly useful in summer, when turning on your full oven meant adding significant heat to your kitchen, making the room uncomfortable, running up your air conditioning bills. The roasting pan used less energy, produced less heat, accomplished similar cooking tasks without the environmental impact. You could prepare a dinner without making your kitchen sweltering, without creating an oven-like atmosphere that made working in the kitchen miserable. The technology was straightforward: heating elements above and below the cooking surface, a thermostat to maintain temperature, a timer to track cooking time. You would load your food, set the temperature and timer, and the roasting pan would do the work. It didn't require preheating the way some ovens did. It heated up quickly, was ready to use in minutes, and the results were impressive. Chickens roasted beautifully in the electric roasting pan, emerging with crispy skin and juicy meat. Casseroles cooked evenly. Vegetables browned nicely. The machine seemed to distribute heat more efficiently than you might have expected, creating results that rivaled your full-sized oven, but without the kitchen heating effect. Yet the electric roasting pan never achieved the ubiquity of some other appliances. It was somewhat redundant for people with full-sized ovens. It required counter space. It was another appliance to store and maintain. But for people who lived in small spaces, or who wanted to reduce their summer kitchen heat, or who simply appreciated the convenience, the electric roasting pan was valuable. The capacity of the roasting pan was usually adequate for family meals. You could roast a chicken that would feed 4 or 5 people. You could bake a large casserole. You could prepare vegetables alongside the main protein. It was capable enough to handle most cooking tasks that didn't require an enormous amount of space. The heating elements worked efficiently to create even cooking. Unlike some full-sized ovens that had hot spots, the roasting pan seemed to cook more uniformly, creating consistent results. The heat distribution was better managed, the cooking more predictable. In homes throughout the 70s, electric roasting pans sat on counters, ready to cook, representing the ongoing effort to miniaturize kitchen tasks, to make cooking more convenient, to solve specific problems through targeted appliances. They demonstrated the era's faith that any household task, no matter how small or specific, could be addressed through the right machine. The electric roasting pan also represented a kind of efficiency that appealed to people who were conscious of energy costs. Using a smaller appliance to do the same job as a larger one seemed environmentally responsible, seemed like a way to reduce your household's energy consumption. The electric shaker promised to revolutionize cocktail preparation, to eliminate the need for manual skill in shaking drinks, to produce perfectly mixed cocktails through mechanical means. You would load it with ice and ingredients, turn it on, and the machine would shake, mixing the drink to perfect consistency. It was efficiency applied to bartending, democratizing a skill that had once required practice and finesse. The electric shaker looked like a specialized blender, with a covered chamber designed to hold ice and liquid, with buttons or dials to control the shaking intensity and duration. You would measure your ingredients into the chamber, add ice, activate the machine, and within seconds you would have a properly mixed cocktail, ready to pour into a glass. Yet the electric shaker never caught on, the way many other appliances did. There was something about the ritual of shaking a cocktail, the physical act, the artistry involved, that people didn't want to mechanize. bartenders resisted. Home entertainers who had developed their shaking technique felt it was unnecessary. The electric shaker represented a convenience that people didn't actually want. Still, some people embraced it, particularly those who felt intimidated by the manual shaking process, who had never quite developed the skill, who appreciated the consistency that the machine provided. For them, the electric shaker made home entertaining easier, made mixed drinks accessible, made the cocktail hour something they could provide without embarrassment. The results from the electric shaker were reliable and consistent. Every drink came out properly mixed, with the right ratio of ingredients and ice, with uniform chilling. There was no guesswork about whether you'd shaken long enough or too long. The machine took the judgment out of the process, yet something was lost. The performance aspect of shaking a cocktail, the way a skilled bartender could command attention through their technique, the artistry and flair that went into a well-shaken drink was eliminated. The electric shaker was efficient but removed the human element, the craft, the personality that a bartender brought to their work. In homes throughout the 70s, electric shakers sat on bar carts or in cabinets, often unused, representing the era's willingness to mechanize anything, regardless of whether mechanization actually improved the result or simply changed the experience. They were monuments to the belief that technology could improve everything, that machines could do anything humans could do, even if humans sometimes preferred to do things themselves. They represented a kind of overreach, an attempt to mechanize something that didn't necessarily need mechanizing, that people often preferred to do the old-fashioned way, with skill and technique and personal touch. The electric knife sharpener promised to solve a problem that had plagued home cooks for generations, keeping kitchen knives sharp. Traditional knife sharpening required skill, required understanding angles, required practice and finesse. You had to learn to use a whetstone to maintain the correct angle, to feel when the blade was sharp enough. Many people simply gave up, using dull knives for years, not realizing how much their dull blades were compromising their cooking experience. The electric knife sharpener changed this. You would slide your dull blade into the slot, activate the machine, and within seconds the blade would be sharpened, ready to use. The machine handled all. The geometry maintained the correct angle, did the actual work of sharpening through rotating stones or other mechanisms. Anyone could use it. You didn't need skill. You didn't need to understand the physics of blade sharpening. You just needed to insert your knife and let the machine work. The sound was distinctive, a high-pitched whirring as the sharpening mechanism spun, grinding against the blade, removing metal, creating a sharp edge. Some people found this sound slightly unsettling, the sense that their valuable kitchen knives were being altered by a machine. Others found it satisfying, the evidence that work was being accomplished, that their dull blades were being restored. And the results were good, consistently good. Even people with no sharpening skill could produce reasonably sharp blades. The electric sharpener democratized knife maintenance, made it accessible, removed it from the realm of specialized knowledge and made it something anyone could do. Yet some cooking purists resisted, insisted that electric sharpeners damaged blades, that the precise angle control of manual sharpening produced superior results, that the process of learning to sharpen knives properly was part of developing true cooking skill. They maintained their whetstones, kept their knives sharp through traditional methods, preserved the connection between user and tool that electric sharpeners had severed. The electric sharpener came in various styles and designs. Some were stationary units that sat on countertops. Others were portable, could be stored in a drawer and brought out when needed. Some had adjustable settings for different blade types. Others were simpler, with just basic slots for standard kitchen knives. But for most home cooks, the electric knife sharpener was a revelation. Sharp knives made cooking easier, made preparation faster, made the entire experience more pleasant. The electric sharpener made sharp knives accessible, made kitchen maintenance simple, represented the ongoing process of removing skill requirements from household tasks, of making everything available to anyone regardless of their level of expertise or practice. In homes throughout the 70s, electric knife sharpeners sat in knife blocks or kitchen drawers, ready to restore dull blades, ready to transform the kitchen experience through the simple application of electricity and mechanical precision. They represented the final promise of the appliance era, that every household task, no matter how small, no matter how specialized, could be mechanized, could be democratized, could be made available to anyone with the money to buy the right machine. And as people moved into the 1980s and beyond, as the fever for new appliances began to cool, as people started to realize that mechanizing everything hadn't actually freed them or made their lives dramatically better, the kitchen would become a monument to this era, crowded with devices both essential and absurd, each one promising transformation, each one representing the belief that the future would be better, easier, more comfortable, if we could just find the right machine for the right task. The fondue pot arrived in the 70s like a culinary ambassador from Europe, promising to transform dinner into a social event, to make cooking communal, to turn a meal into a performance. You would fill the ceramic pot with melted cheese or chocolate, position it over a small flame or heating element, and gather around it with friends or family, each person armed with a long fork, dipping bread or fruit or vegetables into the communal pot. It was interactive dining, participatory cooking, the kitchen's version of theatre. The electric fondue pot represented something fundamentally different from other appliances in this era. It wasn't designed to save time or eliminate labour. It wasn't meant to streamline your kitchen routine or make cooking faster or less demanding. Instead, it was designed to create an experience, to make eating social, to transform a simple meal into an event worth remembering. The fondue pot said something about who you were as a person. You were sophisticated, that you understood European culture, that you were willing to spend time with people around your table, that you valued connection alongside efficiency. The technology was simple but effective. A heating element at the base of the ceramic pot, a thermostat to maintain temperature, usually a dial or switch to control heat intensity. The pot itself was often deliberately attractive, decorated with patterns or glazes, designed to be presentable, to look good sitting on your table. It wasn't hidden away in a cabinet like most appliances, tucked out of sight until needed. It was meant to be seen, meant to be central to the dining experience, meant to be part of the evening's entertainment. Using a fondue pot required attention and participation in ways that most other appliances didn't. You couldn't simply load it and walk away to do other things. You had to tend the cheese, stirring occasionally, ensuring it didn't burn or separate into greasy puddles and hard bits. You had to monitor the chocolate, keeping it warm but not too hot, preventing it from seizing or developing a skin on top. You had to manage the social aspects of the meal actively, ensuring that everyone got their turn, that no one was left waiting too long, that the experience remained communal and pleasant rather than competitive or chaotic. And there was something almost magical about fondue, something that transcended the simple act of eating. You experienced the process of dipping something into melted cheese or chocolate, felt the sensory experience of warm, creamy cheese coating bread, felt the simple pleasure of a shared meal where everyone was participating in the same activity. Fondue created a kind of intimacy that more formal meals didn't permit, broke down barriers between people, made people feel connected through the shared experience of dipping and eating, of moving around the pot, of participating in the same ritual. The fondue pot became a staple of 70s, entertaining, showing up at dinner parties and special occasions throughout the decade, representing the era's commitment to making dining experiences memorable and distinctive. It was impractical in many ways. Cleanup could be tedious and time-consuming. The pots were often difficult to store in small kitchens. The meals didn't always satisfy everyone's nutritional needs or preferences. The cheese could separate if not kept at exactly the right temperature. But people embraced it anyway because it created something that pure efficiency couldn't provide. Connection, community, the sense that a meal was an event worth paying attention to, worth investing time in, worth sharing with other people. The fondue pot also represented a particular kind of aspirational entertaining, the idea that you could create a sophisticated continental experience in your own home. It suggested that you had travelled, that you understood food culture beyond American traditions, that you were cosmopolitan enough to appreciate European dining customs. It allowed you to feel cultured, to feel like you were providing your guests with something special and slightly exotic. Different types of fondue created different social dynamics. Cheese fondue was hearty and warming, perfect for casual gatherings. Chocolate fondue was playful and indulgent, perfect for dessert entertaining. Some adventurous hosts even attempted meat fondue, using hot oil for cooking thin slices of meat. The variety of possibilities meant that fondue could serve many different entertaining purposes. In dining rooms throughout the 70s, fondue pots bubbled gently, their heating elements keeping cheese or chocolate at perfect temperatures, bringing people together, transforming ordinary food into an interactive experience. They represented the belief that technology could serve not just productivity but pleasure, that machines could facilitate human connection, that the future meant finding new ways to gather, new ways to share meals, new ways to be together around something warm and communal and shared. Fondue became the symbol of a certain kind of entertaining, a marker of sophistication and effort, a way to make ordinary dining into something memorable. The electric wok arrived as American cuisine began to expand beyond traditional European influences, as restaurants introducing Asian food became more common in cities and suburbs alike, as people began to appreciate cooking methods from other cultures with genuine curiosity rather than mere novelty. The electric wok promised to make stir-frying accessible to home cooks, to replicate the high-heat cooking of traditional woks, to bring the flavours and techniques of Asian cooking into American home kitchens without requiring a gas range or specialised equipment that most people didn't have. The electric wok was usually a large, shallow cooking vessel, with a heating element built into the flat base, with temperature controls and often a thermostat to maintain consistent heat throughout the cooking process. It sat on the countertop, plugged into a standard outlet, ready to use. You would preheat it, add oil, listen to it heat until it shimmered, and begin stir-frying, moving ingredients around with a spatula or wooden spoon, creating the rapid cooking environment that wok cooking required and celebrated. Yet the electric wok never quite replicated the authentic experience of traditional wok cooking. The heat distribution wasn't the same as a properly seasoned metal wok over an open flame. The surface wasn't as hot as a gas-fired wok could get, never reaching those temperatures that created the distinctive flavour that professional stir-frying developed. The results were adequate, respectable even, but experienced cooks could taste the difference, could feel the difference in how the food cooked. Professional cooks dismissed electric woks entirely, insisted that real stir-frying required traditional woks and high heat that only gas burners could provide, that anything less was a compromise, a pale imitation. Still, for home cooks who didn't have gas ranges, who wanted to explore Asian cooking without investing in specialised equipment or learning new techniques, the electric wok was valuable. It made stir-frying possible where it might not have been otherwise. It demonstrated that you could approximate professional techniques with the right appliance, that you didn't need a restaurant kitchen or professional training to create restaurant-quality food. or at least something close to it. The electric wok also represented the era's fascination with international cuisine, the growing awareness that cooking traditions from other cultures had genuine value, that American kitchens could accommodate multiple cooking styles and traditions. It was an appliance that acknowledged that the world was bigger than traditional American cooking, that there was value in exploring techniques and flavors from elsewhere, that American food culture could be expanded and enriched through exposure to other traditions. Using an electric wok required some adaptation from what traditional stir-frying demanded. You had to learn how to manage the different heat characteristics, had to adjust your timing expectations, had to understand that the cooking process would be slightly different than in a traditional wok. But many people managed these adjustments successfully, learning to work with the appliance's limitations while still achieving good results. The electric wok became increasingly common in American kitchens throughout the 70s, showing up in homes where people wanted to expand their cooking repertoire, where people were interested in Asian cuisine but didn't have access to traditional cooking equipment. It represented the democratization of international cooking, the idea that you didn't need special equipment or years of training to cook food from other cultures. The versatility of the wok meant you could cook many different types of dishes: stir-fries with vegetables and protein, fried rice, noodle dishes. The large surface area and sloped sides made it perfect for tossing and moving ingredients quickly. Even without authentic heat, the wok's design made it a functional cooking vessel. In kitchens throughout the 70s, electric woks sat on countertops, representing the ongoing effort to democratize cooking, to make specialized techniques accessible to home cooks without professional training, to create appliances that could approximate professional results without requiring professional training or equipment. They were imperfect tools but useful ones, enabling people to explore cooking methods they might not otherwise have had access to, expanding the possibilities of what could be cooked at home, creating bridges between American kitchens and culinary traditions from around the world. They represented the belief that food from other cultures should be accessible to everyone, that traditional cooking methods could be adapted to American kitchens, that cultural exchange could happen through the simple act of cooking. The electric grill promised to bring outdoor grilling indoors, to allow year-round grilling regardless of weather conditions, to eliminate the need for charcoal or propane, to transform grilling from a seasonal outdoor activity into something you could do anytime, anywhere. It was a flat cooking surface, usually with grooves that mimicked traditional grill marks, with a heating element underneath that could be controlled precisely, with temperature controls that allowed you to adjust the heat from low simmer to high sear. You could use the electric grill on a countertop or on a table, could cook indoors when weather was bad, could grill in apartments where outdoor grilling wasn't permitted by lease or building regulations. The electric grill represented liberation from the limitations of outdoor grilling, from dependence on weather patterns, from the need to have a patio or deck or outdoor space. It meant that anyone, regardless of their living situation or their climate, could grill whenever they wanted. Yet the electric grill created a fundamentally different kind of cooking experience than outdoor grilling provided. The smoke was eliminated, which some people appreciated intensely and others lamented deeply. Food cooked on an electric grill tasted different, lacking the smoky flavour that traditional grilling provided, missing the nuance that charcoal or wood smoke created. The ritual of outdoor grilling, the social experience of gathering around a grill on a summer evening, the sense of cooking over fire, was lost when you brought the grill indoors. What remained was efficient cooking, but something intangible had been sacrificed. Still, the electric grill was useful for people who lived in apartments where outdoor grilling wasn't possible, for those who wanted to grill in winter, for anyone who appreciated the convenience of indoor grilling without the coordination required to manage charcoal or propane. It made grilled food possible when outdoor grilling wasn't feasible, provided a way to cook foods that people associated with outdoor entertaining, even when the weather or circumstances didn't permit outdoor cooking. Using an electric grill was straightforward and accessible. You plugged it in, set the temperature, waited for it to preheat, and began cooking. There was no need to manage charcoal temperatures or worry about fire safety. The cooking surface was accessible, easy to reach, easy to manage. You didn't have to stand outside in bad weather. You could grill and attend to other tasks in your home. It was efficient and convenient in ways that outdoor grilling simply couldn't match. The electric grill also represented the era's commitment to internalizing outdoor activities, to bringing the outside world inside, to making seasonal activities available year-round through technology. It was part of the larger effort to make life more controlled, more predictable, more independent from natural conditions and seasonal variations. If you could heat your home in winter and cool it in summer, why not grill year-round as well? Cleaning the electric grill was easier than cleaning outdoor grills, simpler than managing charcoal or dealing with ash. Many models had removable cooking surfaces that could be washed, making maintenance straightforward. This practicality appealed to people who loved grilled food but hated the maintenance requirements of traditional grills. The heat distribution on electric grills was usually quite even, creating consistent cooking. You could cook different items at different temperatures on different parts of the grill, managing the cooking process with precision. The thermostat maintained consistent temperature, eliminating the temperature fluctuations that charcoal grills were prone to. In kitchens and dining areas throughout the 70s, electric grills cooked steaks and vegetables and chicken, creating the appearance of grilled food without the outdoor experience. They were practical tools that solved specific problems, enabling people to cook in ways that would otherwise have been impossible, proving that technology could create new possibilities, could make activities accessible to people who didn't have traditional access to them, could bring the pleasure of grilled food to anyone with an electrical outlet and a flat cooking surface. So tonight, as you settle deeper into whatever comforts surround you, take a moment to think about those kitchens from the 1970s. Picture them clearly, the Cuisinart gleaming on the counter, the coffee maker humming its gentle alarm, the heating pad glowing softly in a bedroom somewhere. Picture the people who moved through those spaces, tired people, hopeful people, people who believed that machines could make their lives better, and often, in small ways, they were right. We walk through an entire day with them today. We woke in mansions and apartments. We prepared meals with machines that promised to save us time, though time, we learned, is never really saved, it is only spent differently. We gathered around fondue pots and worked in offices beside water coolers. We came home to the smell of dinner already made. We sat in massage chairs and felt our bodies finally relax after hours of performing, of maintaining, of holding ourselves together. These people were not so different from you. They worried about the same things. They felt the same exhaustion. They appreciated comfort when they found it. They believed in progress, sometimes too much, sometimes not enough. They populated a world that was being reshaped by electricity and engineering, by the quiet promise that technology could improve daily life. And mostly it did. Not perfectly, not without cost, but enough. The 70s understood something we sometimes forget, that comfort matters, that small conveniences accumulate into genuine improvement, that there is dignity in the ordinary work of keeping a life running. The people of that era didn't need everything to be revolutionary. They were satisfied with the gentle hum of machines doing small tasks well. They were content to trust appliances with their mornings, their meals, their comfort. So tonight, as you prepare for sleep, remember one thing from those kitchens, that bedroom, that dining room. Remember that someone decades ago woke up grateful for hot coffee waiting. Someone felt their pain ease under a heating pad's gentle warmth. Someone gathered with people they loved around something warm and shared. These moments were not dramatic, they were not headline-worthy, but they were real, and they were enough. The future they imagined arrived, though not exactly as they thought. But what remains is this: the understanding that daily life is worth honouring, that comfort is worth pursuing, that small moments of ease matter profoundly. Carry that forward. Notice when something makes your day easier. Appreciate it. Rest in it. Close your eyes now. Feel the warmth of whatever covers you. The future is still arriving, still being built in kitchens and bedrooms and ordinary spaces, and you, like those people in the 70s, are living through it moment by moment, breath by breath, day by day. Sleep well. You have earned your rest.